February 13th, 2017, Delphi, Indiana. A warm winter day. Two best friends, 13-year-old Abigail Williams and 14-year-old Libby German, decide to spend their day off from school hiking on the Monon High Bridge Trail. At 2:13 p.m., Libby pulls out her phone. Everyone calls her Libby. She's recording something. Or someone. In the grainy video, you can see a man walking behind them on the abandoned railroad bridge. He's wearing a blue jacket, jeans, and a hat. He's getting closer. Then you hear his voice. Muffled but clear enough. Guys, a pause, down the hill. Those 4 words, captured by a 14-year-old girl who somehow knew she needed to record this moment, would become the most analyzed piece of evidence in one of America's most haunting murder cases. By the next morning, both girls would be dead. Their throats had been cut. Their bodies were found less than a mile from the bridge, partially covered with sticks. And despite having a video of the killer, despite having his voice on tape, despite hundreds of tips and thousands of investigators working the case, it would take 5 years to make an arrest. This is the red string. Let me take you back to that day. February 13th, 2017. Delphi, Indiana. A small town of about 3,000 people. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone. Where kids can walk to school. Where parents don't think twice about letting their teenagers hike on a popular trail. It's an unseasonably warm day. Temperatures reach the mid-50s. Schools are closed for a teacher in-service day. Abby Williams and Libby German are best friends. Abby is 13, Libby is 14. They're in 8th grade. They love music, Snapchat, hanging out together. They're normal teenagers. That morning, they decide to go hiking on the Delphi historic trails, specifically to the Monon High Bridge. It's an abandoned railroad trestle that's become a popular local landmark. The bridge was built in 1891. It stands 63 feet above Deer Creek. The wooden planks are spaced apart. You can see straight down through the gaps. It's not an easy walk, but it's an adventure. At approximately 1:30 p.m., Libby's older sister, Kelsey German, drops the girls off at the trailhead on County Road 300 North. The plan is simple. The girls will hike for a couple of hours, and someone will pick them up around 3 p.m. Kelsey watches them walk toward the trail. She has no reason to worry. This is Delphi. Nothing bad happens here. At 2:07 p.m., Libby posts a photo to Snapchat. It shows Abby walking across the Monon High Bridge. Abby is wearing a tie-dye shirt. She looks happy. Behind her you can see the bridge stretching into the distance, the wooden railroad ties, the cables. It's a normal teenage photo. The kind millions of kids post every day. At 2:13 p.m., Libby starts recording a video. We don't know exactly what made her do it. Maybe the man behind them was making her uncomfortable. Maybe she sensed something was wrong. Maybe she was just recording the scenery. Whatever the reason, Libby German made a decision that would define this case. She documented what happened next. The video is 43 seconds long. It's grainy, shaky, the kind of footage you'd expect from a phone being held discreetly, maybe in a pocket or at someone's side. At first you see Abby walking ahead on the bridge. The camera moves around, showing glimpses of the trail, the trees, the structure of the bridge. And then in the distance behind Abby, a figure comes into view. A man, walking deliberately, his hands in his pockets. He's wearing a blue jacket, jeans, and what looks like a brown or tan hoodie underneath. His clothes are layered, which is odd for such a warm day. He's wearing a hat, possibly a newsboy cap or similar style. The video captures him for only a few seconds, but those seconds are crucial. As the video continues, the girls' voices can be heard discussing which way to go. The trail ends at the bridge. There's confusion about where to walk next, and then you hear it, a man's voice, not loud, not shouting, but commanding. Guys, the girls go quiet. Then, down the hill, the video stops. What happened in the minutes after that recording ended is horrific. But at 2:13 p.m., Libby and Abby were still alive. And Libby had just documented their killer. By 3 p.m., the girls haven't shown up at the pickup location. Calls to their phones go unanswered. By 5:30 p.m., family members are searching the trails themselves, calling out the girls' names. By 5:45 p.m., the Carroll County Sheriff's Office is notified. A missing persons report is filed. By nightfall, dozens of volunteers are combing the woods with flashlights. Law enforcement brings in search dogs. The community mobilizes immediately, but there's no trace of Abby and Libby. The search continues through the night. Temperatures drop. The woods are dark, dense, difficult to navigate. Where are they? February 14, 2017. Morning. The search resumes at first light. Volunteers, law enforcement, family members, everyone is looking. At approximately noon, searchers find something. About a quarter-mile from the Monon High Bridge, on the southeast side of Deer Creek, 2 bodies are discovered in a wooded area. It's Abby and Libby. They're lying close together. Branches and sticks have been placed over them in what investigators later describe as an attempt at concealment, though the bodies aren't completely covered. Both girls' throats have been cut. Abby has one deep 7-inch wound across her neck. Libby has 4 or 5 wounds. The 3 main blood vessels in her neck were severed. The attack was brutal, violent, personal. The crime scene is horrific. Indiana State Police crime scene investigator Brian Olhai would later testify about what he saw. A large pool of blood between the bodies. Some of the girls' clothing found in the nearby creek, turned inside out. Evidence suggesting the girls had been moved or staged. Abby is found wearing Libby's clothing. Libby is found nude. The medical examiner determines there's no evidence of sexual assault, though investigators note it may still have been the attacker's intention. Forensic pathologist Dr. Roland Kaur conducts the autopsies. His findings are devastating. Libby didn't die immediately from her wounds. Blood spatter evidence suggests she was alive for several minutes after the attack began. She was likely dragged back to the location where she was found. Think about that. A 14-year-old girl, her throat cut, aware of what was happening, unable to call for help. And then investigators find something crucial: Libby's phone. It's in its Harry Potter-themed case, found underneath Abby's body. The phone is intact, and on it police find the video. The audio recording, evidence that will become the center of one of the most publicized murder investigations in recent American history. February 15, 2017, the day after the bodies are discovered. Indiana State Police hold a press conference. They confirm that the 2 bodies found are Abby Williams and Libby German. They announce the case is now a double homicide investigation. But they don't release many details. They don't mention the video. They don't mention the audio. Not yet. The community of Delphi is in shock. Parents who had always felt their children were safe in Delphi suddenly realize, if this can happen in broad daylight on a popular hiking trail, it can happen anywhere. On February 15th, investigators released 2 grainy photographs taken from Libby's video. The images show a man walking on the Monon High Bridge. He's wearing jeans, a blue jacket, and a brown hoodie. The photographs are low quality, pixelated, hard to make out facial features, but they're clear enough to see. This is a middle-aged white male, average height, average build. He could be anyone. Law enforcement asks the public, do you recognize this man? Do you recognize his clothing, his gait, the way he walks? The photos are released to every news outlet in America. They're shared millions of times on social media. Then on February 22nd, exactly 1 week after the murders, Indiana State Police released the audio. At a press conference, they play the recording for the media and the public. Guys, down the hill. 4 words, muffled but audible. A man's voice, calm but commanding. ISP Superintendent Doug Carter speaks to the media. We're asking you to listen very carefully to this audio. This is not 2 people speaking. This is one person. This is the person on the bridge with the girls. The audio is played on every news station in the country. People listen to it over and over, analyzing the voice, The tone, the accent. Does it sound like someone you know? The man in the photographs becomes known as Bridge Guy. His image is everywhere. His voice is everywhere. But no one comes forward with a definitive identification. Investigators follow thousands of leads. Tips pour in from across America. People report seeing suspicious men. People claim to recognize the voice. People offer theories. In July 2017, 5 months after the murders, police release a composite sketch of a suspect. The sketch shows a younger-looking man, perhaps in his 20s or 30s, with a fuller face. The sketch is based on witness descriptions. Several people reported seeing a man on the trail that day who matched Bridge Guy's description, but the sketch doesn't lead to an arrest. Several people were on the Monon High Bridge Trail on February 13, 2017. Their testimonies would later prove crucial. Brianne Wilbur, a high school student at the time, testified she saw a man on the trail around 2 p.m., shortly before Libby recorded the video. She described him as matching Bridge Guy's appearance. He was dressed in many layers despite the warm weather. He was walking with a purpose. He gave me weird vibes, she told investigators. Sarah Carbaugh was driving past the trail around 4 p.m. that afternoon. She saw a man walking away from the bridge area with his hands in his pockets. She later described him as looking muddy and bloody. Initially, Carbaugh didn't report what she saw. She was scared. But 3 weeks later she came forward. Another witness reported seeing a man on the trail who seemed out of place. The man was dressed oddly for the weather and appeared agitated. All of these witnesses described someone who could have been Bridge Guy, but none of them could definitively identify him. Here's where the case takes a frustrating turn. In February 2017, just 2 days after the girls' bodies were discovered, a man contacted the Indiana Department of Natural Resources Conservation Officer's tip line. That man said he had been on the Monon High Bridge Trail on February 13th between approximately 1:30 p.m. and 3:30 p.m. He said he saw 3 girls on the trail. He provided his name, his contact information, and details about what he was wearing that day. That man's name was Richard Allen. The tip was filed, and then somehow it was lost in the system. For 5 years, Richard Allen's tip sat in a box with hundreds of other tips. It was never properly followed up on. Richard Allen continued living in Delphi. He worked at the local CVS pharmacy right on Main Street. He developed customers' photos, including possibly photos taken at vigils and memorials for Abby and Libby. He lived less than a mile from where the girls' bodies were found, and nobody knew. In April 2019, more than 2 years after the murders, Indiana State Police hold a press conference. They release a new sketch, and this one is dramatically different from the first. The new sketch shows a younger man, possibly in his 20s, with a fuller face, different features. ISP announces that this new sketch is now the primary suspect image, and the original sketch from 2017 is now considered secondary. The change is jarring. Why a completely different sketch more than 2 years into the investigation? Superintendent Doug Carter speaks directly to the killer during the press conference. "We believe you are hiding in plain sight. We likely have interviewed you or someone close to you. We know this is about power to you, and you want to know what we know." Carter's message is chilling, emotional. He seems convinced they're close to solving the case. But months pass, then a year, then 2 years. No arrest. The case goes cold. As law enforcement struggles to identify Bridge Guy, something else is happening. The internet takes over. The Delphi murders become one of the most discussed, unsolved cases online. Reddit communities form. YouTube channels dedicate hundreds of videos to the case. Facebook groups attract tens of thousands of members. Amateur sleuths analyze every frame of the Bridge Guy video. They enhance the audio, trying to hear additional words or background sounds. They debate the accent. They examine the clothing. The blue jacket, what brand is it? The jeans, what style? Theories multiply. Some believe Bridge Guy is a local resident, someone who knew the trails, someone who blended into the community. Others think he's a transient, someone passing through Delphi, perhaps connected to the railroad tracks that run through town. Some theorize there was more than one killer. True crime podcasts dedicate entire series to the case. The case becomes an obsession for thousands of people who have never been to Delphi, who never knew Abby or Libby, but who feel compelled to help solve their murders. In Delphi itself, the community is forever changed. Homeowners across central Indiana install orange lights on their porches. Orange was Libby's favorite color. The lights are a memorial, but they're also a reminder the killer is still out there. Families who once let their children walk freely are now afraid. Trust has been shattered. The families of Abby and Libby are caught in an impossible position. They want to keep the case in the public eye. They want people to keep calling in tips, but they also want privacy to grieve. Libby's grandmother, Becky Patty, becomes a visible advocate. She gives interviews, attends vigils, pleads with the public to keep looking, keep thinking, keep hoping. Someone knows who this is, she says repeatedly. Someone knows, but year after year, no arrest comes. September 2022, 5.5 years after the murders, a volunteer receptionist named Kathy Shank is working through old tips for the Delphi investigation. She's organizing paperwork, entering information into a digital database. She comes across a tip from February 2017. A man reported being on the trail the afternoon of February 13th, around the same time Abby and Libby were there. The man's name Richard Allen. Shank realizes something. This tip was never properly followed up on. She immediately flags it for investigators. Within days, detectives are looking into Richard Allen. He's 50 years old. He lives in Delphi, just blocks from where the search for the girls had been staged 5 years earlier. He's a pharmacy technician at the local CVS. He's married. He has no criminal record. He's quiet, unassuming. The kind of guy you'd see at the grocery store and never think twice about. But he placed himself on the trail at the exact time the murders occurred. Detectives contact Allen. They ask if they can speak with him. On October 13, 2022, Allen agrees to be interviewed. The interview is videotaped. Allen tells investigators he was on the trail between approximately 1:30 and 3:30 p.m. on February 13, 2017. He says he was watching fish in Deer Creek. He saw 3 girls on the trail, but he didn't interact with them. He describes what he was wearing that day: a blue or black Carhartt jacket, jeans, a hat. Detectives note, this matches Bridge Guy's clothing. They ask Allen if he would consent to a search of his home. He agrees. On October 13, 2022, investigators execute a search warrant at Allen's residence. They seize multiple items, including firearms. One of those firearms is a Sig Sauer Model P226 .40 caliber handgun. Investigators send the gun to a ballistics lab for testing, and they discover something crucial. Remember the crime scene? Among the evidence collected in February 2017 was an unspent .40 caliber bullet. It was found between Abby and Libby's bodies, less than 2 feet from one of the victims. The bullet had never been fired. It was a live round that had been cycled through a gun but not discharged. Firearms examiners can sometimes match an unspent round to a specific gun based on markings left by the gun's ejector and extractor, the mechanisms that load and eject rounds from the chamber. When investigators test-fired Richard Allen's Sig Sauer P226, they compared the ejector markings on test rounds to the bullet found at the crime scene. The conclusion, according to prosecution expert testimony, the unspent round found between the girls' bodies had been cycled through Richard Allen's gun. The defense would later challenge this finding, calling it a magic bullet and an apples to oranges comparison. They'd argue that it's impossible to definitively match an unspent round to a specific firearm with certainty. But for prosecutors, this was the physical evidence they needed, combined with Allen's own admission that he was on the trail that day, combined with his clothing matching Bridge Guy's description, combined with his proximity to the crime scene. Investigators believed they had their man. On October 26, 2022, Richard Allen is arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder. The arrest sends shockwaves through Delphi. Richard Allen, the guy from CVS. People who knew him are stunned. He seemed normal, quiet, polite. He had no history of violence, no criminal record. He developed our photos, one resident says in disbelief. Photos of the memorials, photos of the searches, photos of the vigils, and he never said a word. Carroll County Sheriff Tony Liggett, speaking after the arrest, admits, Richard Allen got lost in the cracks. That initial tip from February 2017 should have been followed up on immediately. It wasn't, and a killer allegedly lived among them for 5 years. The arrest brings relief, but also anger. How did this happen? How did Allen slip through? After his arrest, Richard Allen is held in state prison, first at Westville Correctional Facility, then at Wabash Valley Correctional Facility, rather than county jail. He's placed in a maximum security unit, for safety reasons, authorities say. Because of the high-profile nature of the case, Allen is placed in solitary confinement for 13 months total, and then something extraordinary happens. Richard Allen begins confessing, not once, not twice, over 60 times. He confesses to the prison warden, to correctional officers, to the psychologist treating him, to other inmates, to his wife, to his mother, in person, on phone calls, in writing. One correctional officer, Michael Clemens, who served as Allen's suicide watch companion, keeps detailed logs. In those logs, he notes that Allen said, "I, Richard Matthew Allen, killed Abby and Libby by myself. No one helped me." Dr. Monica Walla, the clinical psychologist assigned to Allen at Westville, documents multiple confessions. In April 2023, Allen tells her in detail what happened. He followed the girls across the bridge. He ordered them down the hill and across the creek. His intention was sexual assault, but he didn't go through with it. Instead, he cut their throats. He covered their bodies with branches. On May 10, 2023, during a phone call to his wife that was recorded, Allen says, "I didn't do everything I said I did, but I killed Abby and Libby." His wife hangs up on him. In another recorded call to his wife on April 3, 2023, Allen says, "Honey, I did it. I killed Abby and Libby." She tells him not to say that. He continues repeating it. In a letter addressed to the warden, dated March 5, 2023, Allen writes, "I am ready to officially confess for killing Abby and Libby. I hope I get the opportunity to tell the families I'm sorry." 60 confessions, to multiple people, consistent details. It seems like an open and shut case, but then the defense presents their counter-argument. Allen's defense attorneys argue something crucial. The confessions aren't reliable, because Allen was experiencing a severe mental health crisis. During his time in solitary confinement, Allen's mental state deteriorated rapidly. Testimony from prison staff and the psychologist paint a disturbing picture. Allen was found naked in his cell, covered in his own feces. He was eating paper. He was drinking from the toilet. He was exhibiting bizarre erratic behavior. He was diagnosed with psychosis. He was placed on suicide watch multiple times. The defense argues that after 13 months in solitary confinement, a condition widely recognized as psychologically damaging, Allen's confessions were not the product of guilt, but of a man suffering a complete mental breakdown. He was trying to escape the psychological torment. The defense claims he would have said anything to make it stop. Dr. Walla, the psychologist, actually testified that at one point she believed Allen was faking symptoms, but later evaluations showed his condition was genuine. The defense points to video footage showing Allen catatonic hours after supposedly giving a lucid confession. How could he be coherent one moment and completely unresponsive the next? They also highlight this critical fact. No DNA evidence links Richard Allen to the crime scene. None. No DNA on the girls' bodies. No DNA on the clothing found in the creek. No DNA under their fingernails. When investigators searched Allen's home, they found no blood evidence, no fibers, no physical connection to the victims despite the brutal nature of the crime. The defense also questions the bullet evidence. Why weren't more photographs taken of the unspent round at the crime scene? Could it have been contaminated? Could it have come from somewhere else, perhaps from a law enforcement officer's weapon? Firearms expert witness for the defense testified that matching an unspent round to a specific gun is unreliable, especially when no other physical evidence corroborates the connection. The defense also raises the question, if Allen committed these murders, where is the murder weapon? No knife was ever recovered. Their argument boils down to this: confessions made by a man experiencing psychosis, held in solitary confinement for over a year, do not equal proof beyond a reasonable doubt, especially when there's no DNA, no murder weapon, and no other physical evidence tying him to the crime. But the prosecution has a response. October 18, 2024. More than 7 years after Abby and Libby were murdered, the trial of Richard Allen begins. The trial is held in Delphi, but the jury is brought in from Allen County in northeastern Indiana. All 12 jurors, 7 women and 5 men, are sequestered throughout the trial. They're not allowed to go home. They're kept away from media coverage. Special Judge Francis Gull presides over the case. Cameras are banned from the courtroom, a controversial decision,
but Judge Gull maintains it's necessary to ensure a fair trial. The trial lasts 17 days. 40 witnesses testify for the prosecution. The defense presents their own experts and witnesses. Every day, the courtroom is packed. Family members of Abby and Libby attend. Alan's wife, Kathy, sits in the gallery. Community members line up for hours to get a seat. Outside the courthouse, crowds gather. Some hold signs supporting the victims' families. Others hold signs questioning Alan's guilt. Prosecutor Nicholas McClellan tells the jury this case comes down to 3 key pieces of evidence. First, Richard Allen is bridge guy. McClellan shows the jury the enhanced 43-second video from Libby's phone. He walks them through each frame. He points out the man's clothing, his gait, his approach. This is Richard Allen, McClellan says. He kidnapped them and later murdered them. The prosecution argues that Allen's own description of what he was wearing that day, blue jacket, jeans, hat, matches bridge guy's clothing exactly. Second, the bullet evidence. Firearms examiner testifies that the unspent .40 caliber round found at the crime scene was cycled through Allen's Sig Sauer P26. The quality and quantity of marks on the round match test fires from Allen's gun. The defense challenges this heavily, but the prosecution maintains its solid forensic evidence. Third, the confessions. This is where the prosecution spends the most time. Over several days, jurors hear recordings of Alan's phone calls from prison. They hear his voice, "I did it. I killed Abby and Libby." They hear him ask his wife, "Do you still love me?" and reference the electric chair. They hear him say to his mother, "I need to tell the families I'm sorry." Correctional officers testify about statements Alan made in prison. Dr. Walla testifies about the confessions Alan made to her in clinical settings, including specific details about the crime. The prosecution plays these recordings multiple times. They want the jury to hear Alan's voice, his tone, his words. McClellan argues, why would an innocent man confess over 60 times? Why would he confess to family members he loves? Why would he confess consistently, with details that match the evidence? Defense attorney Bradley Rozzi stands before the jury and delivers a different narrative. Richard Allen is innocent. He was coerced, he was suffering, and there is reasonable doubt. Rozzi walks the jury through Alan's mental health decline in prison. He shows them documentation of Alan's psychosis. He plays video of Alan looking catatonic. This is not a man confessing out of guilt, Rozzi argues. This is a man desperate to escape psychological torture. The defense brings in mental health experts who testify about the effects of solitary confinement. They cite research showing that prolonged isolation can cause hallucinations, psychosis, and even false confessions. Rozzi also hammers on the lack of physical evidence. Where is Richard Allen's DNA? It's not at the scene. Where is the murder weapon? It was never found. Where is the proof, real, physical proof that Richard Allen killed these girls? The defense questions the bullet evidence extensively. They bring their own firearms expert who testifies that matching an unspent round is unreliable and that the methodology used was flawed. They point out that a hair found on Abby's hand didn't match Allen's DNA. Whose hair was it? Rozzi also challenges the timeline. He presents evidence suggesting Allen had already left the trails before the murders occurred. He had every chance to run, Rozzi tells the jury. But he didn't, because he didn't do it. On Thursday, November 7, 2024, closing arguments conclude. Judge Gull gives the jury their final instructions. The 12 jurors are told to deliberate from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. each day until they reach a verdict. They deliberate for 4 days, approximately 19 hours total. On Monday, November 11, 2024, at 1:21 p.m., the jury reaches a verdict. The courtroom is silent as the jury files in.
Richard Allen sits at the defense table, flanked by his attorneys. He's wearing civilian clothes. His face is expressionless. Behind him, the gallery is packed. Abby's family sits on one side, Libby's family on the other. Judge Gull asks the foreman, "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." The verdict forms are handed to the judge. She reviews them silently. Then she hands them to the clerk to be read aloud. In the matter of the state of Indiana versus Richard Matthew Allen, on the count of felony murder of Abigail Williams while committing or attempting to commit kidnapping, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of felony murder of Libby German while committing or attempting to commit kidnapping, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of murder for knowingly killing Abigail Williams, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of murder for knowingly killing Libby German, we find the defendant guilty. Guilty on all 4 counts. Richard Allen shows no reaction. He sits perfectly still, but his mother and wife, seated in the gallery, sob audibly. Abby's family members embrace each other, tears streaming down their faces. Libby's family does the same. Outside the courthouse, the news spreads immediately. Cheers erupt in the town square. "Justice," someone shouts. Finally. December 20th, 2024. Richard Allen returns to the Carroll County Courthouse for sentencing. A gag order that had been in place since his arrest is finally lifted. For the first time since 2017, the families of Abby and Libby are allowed to speak publicly about the case. Libby's grandmother, Becky Patty, addresses the court. Her voice shakes with emotion. "I can never change my choice to let Libby and Abby go to the trails that day. I live with that every single day." She looks directly at Allen. "You worked at CVS. You developed photos of our memorials, our searches, our pain, and you did it without blinking, without remorse. I hope you live with the same fear you caused Abby and Libby in the last hour of their lives." Abby's grandmother, Diane Erskine, speaks next. "This is a day of great sadness for our family. We won't be going home to celebrate with champagne." She reflects on the life Abby never got to live. "I've watched her friends graduate college. I wonder how many great-grandchildren were murdered that day, too." Erskine reveals something heartbreaking. Abby's last words, captured on Libby's phone, were, "Don't leave me up here." "So I didn't leave," Erskine says. "I didn't leave the trial, even during the hardest testimony, because Abby asked me not to leave her." Libby's mother, Carrie Timmons, speaks about the trauma that will never heal. "I suffer from PTSD, depression, guilt, and anxiety." Libby would be 22 years old now. "We don't celebrate her birthday anymore, because it's too painful." Libby's grandfather, Mike Patty, looks at Allen. "You could have taken accountability. You didn't." Indiana State Police Lieutenant Jerry Holman, who investigated the case from the beginning, addresses the court. "This crime was brutal. Abby and Libby were stalked, kidnapped, humiliated, and treated like animals." Carroll County Sheriff Tony Liggett apologizes to the families. "This case took 8 years to reach this point. That's unacceptable. These families deserved better." He reflects on what the verdict means and what it doesn't. "There will never be any closure in this case. A form of justice was served, but it does not bring Abby or Libby back. These families will live every day without two of the most important people in their lives." Richard Allen is given the opportunity to speak. He declines. Judge Gold delivers the sentence: 65 years for the murder of Abigail Williams, 65 years for the murder of Libby German, to be served consecutively. Total 130 years in prison. Allen's 760 days already served will count toward his sentence. But at 52 years old, Richard Allen will spend the rest of his life in prison. He is led out of the courtroom in shackles. His wife, Kathy Allen, tells reporters as she leaves, "This isn't over at all." She's right. Allen's attorneys have 30 days after sentencing to file an appeal. The legal battle may continue for years, but for the families, for the community of Delphi, for the thousands of people who followed this case for nearly 8 years, this day represents something. Not closure, but a step toward healing. The Delphi Murders case will be studied for years. It raises profound questions about justice, investigation, and evidence. Libby German is a hero. In the final moments of her life, she had the presence of mind to document her killer. That video, that audio recording, captured by a 14-year-old girl, became the center of the entire investigation. Without Libby's quick thinking, would this case ever have been solved? Probably not. Law enforcement hailed her bravery. "She's a hero," Indiana State Police said. "She gave us everything we needed." But the case also reveals failures in the system. Richard Allen contacted authorities 2 days after the murders. He admitted he was on the trail at the time of the killings. He described his clothing, and that tip was filed away and forgotten for 5 years. 5 years during which Allen lived in Delphi, worked at CVS, walked the same streets as the victims' families, developed their photos, How many other tips were missed? How many other leads went unfollowed? Carroll County Sheriff Tony Liggett was candid in his assessment. Richard Allen got lost in the cracks. That should never have happened. The case also highlights the power and the pitfalls of online communities investigating true crime. Thousands of amateur sleuths worked tirelessly to identify Bridge Guy. They analyzed the video frame by frame. They discussed theories. They kept the case alive in the public consciousness. But they also spread misinformation. They accused innocent people. They complicated the investigation. False accusations circulated. People's lives were disrupted by internet vigilantes convinced they'd identified the killer. The Delphi case is a reminder. True crime is not entertainment. These are real families, real victims, real lives destroyed. Even with Richard Allen convicted and sentenced, questions linger. Why did he do it? Prosecutors suggested sexual assault was the motive, though it didn't occur. Allen himself in his confessions alluded to sexual intentions. But is that the whole story? Or was there something else, something darker, more random, that drove him to kill 2 children? Was he acting alone? The defense raised the possibility of multiple perpetrators. The staging of the bodies, the lack of certain forensic evidence. Could someone have helped? Prosecutors insist Allen acted alone. His confessions consistently stated, "I did it by myself." But the debate continues online. What happened in those missing minutes? The video ends at 2:13. The girls' phones go dark shortly after. What happened between that moment and the murders? Libby and Abby were forced down the hill and across Deer Creek. Their bodies were found on the opposite side of the creek from where they were last seen. How long were they held captive? What did Allen say to them? Were they aware of what was about to happen? These are questions that may never be fully answered. What about the hair found on Abby's hand? DNA testing showed it didn't belong to Abby, Libby, or Richard Allen. Whose hair was it? Could it have been transferred innocently from the environment? Or does it point to someone else being involved? The prosecution argued it was likely a contamination or transfer from the scene. The defense saw it as reasonable doubt. The jury sided with the prosecution. Today, the Abby and Libby Memorial Park continues to grow. It's a place where families can gather, where children can play, where the community can remember 2 girls who should still be here. Orange lights still glow on porches across Delphi and beyond. Every February 13th, vigils are held. Flowers are placed at the trailhead. People gather to remember. Abby Williams would be 21 years old now. Libby German would be 22. They should have graduated high school. They should have gone to college, started careers, fallen in love, built lives. Instead, their lives were stolen on a warm February afternoon in 2017. But they are not forgotten. Libby's sister, Kelsey German, posted on social media after the verdict. Nearly 8 years. Today was the day. Abby's family, Libby's family, they can finally exhale. Not fully, not completely, but they can take a step forward. Tonight we'll be able to go to sleep knowing that we're all safe again, one Delphi resident said after the verdict. The man is now going to be put behind bars for what he has done. The story of the Delphi murders is a tragedy that exposed the best and worst of humanity. The worst, a man who stalked 2 children, forced them into the woods, and murdered them in cold blood. The best, a community that never gave up. A sister who drove them to the trail and has advocated for them ever since. A grandmother who attended every day of trial because her granddaughter asked her not to leave. Thousands of strangers who kept the case alive, who left flowers, who refused to let Abby and Libby be forgotten. And most of all, Libby German, who in the final moments of her life recorded her killer and gave investigators the evidence they needed. 7 years, thousands of tips, hundreds of investigators, one devastating mistake that allowed a suspect to slip through the cracks for 5 years. But in the end, justice. Richard Allen will spend the rest of his life in prison. Abby and Libby are finally at peace. This is the red string, where the threads of truth always lead us home.